So the session that we're going to be discussing today is about emerging security threats, emerging security models. So why are we going to be discussing this today? Well, to start with, a lot of the TTPs have changed today. A lot of the ways in which hackers were targeting companies have changed. Even the language that they use to code malware has changed. Obfuscation capabilities have become better. ChatGPT is now a really powerful weapon that can actually clear a Wharton business exam, and that is able to code malware and write spear phishing emails. What's needed today is a next generation SOC. What's needed today is a single pane of glass that gives CISOs the visibility and automation that helps them make their lives easier, especially with respect to GRC. Well, so on the topic of GRC, we'll start with the fintech companies. We've got a whole host of fintech companies here, some of India's shining startup examples. So let me start with you. Let me start with Cred. So to start with, if you could tell me at Cred, what is the generation for you? I mean, what is the reason for you to have a new generation SOC? In what ways have threats diversified the need for fortifying your SOC capabilities?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Privileged to be part of this panel. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for staying back for the last session of the day. I'll try to set the premise for rest of the panel members. When it comes to fintech and SOC, what I feel is SOC today is a skill which all of us are trying to develop. It's not that we are out there doing the best, but this is a skill which we are trying to develop for a very, very long time. Now the question is regarding the fintech, and when it comes to fintech and SOC, I think it's a very close sort of a relationship that has been there forever. And when you talk about SOC altogether, I think one of the first thing that comes to our mind is incident, right? And contrary to what we think, I think if you have to ask me, then I'll take a step back and try to set the expectation of what a SOC should do, right? And as a company, it's important for us to understand what we have really done when it comes to SOC, right? And there are few things that comes to my mind, which I'll probably talk about, right? And do an expectation setting of what a SOC should basically do, right? Even before we move to fintech, right? So the first thing that comes to my mind is defense in depth, right? And I think we have spoken about this enough. And to be very, very precise when it comes to defense in depth, what we are really talking about today is how do we basically build a barrier between attacker and our, our cloud or our on-prem premises. How do we create those barriers, right? And how do we complicate, or how do we, create variations wherein it becomes difficult for attacker and defenders to basically, communicate altogether, right? So this is what defense in depth is. The second important point today when it comes to SOC is around cyber IT, right? Today, when it comes to IT and cyber IT, I think the coverage is sort of very, very important. And this is where the SOC largely plays an important part wherein are you fully covered and what sort of coverage your SOC is able to give you, right? The third and most important thing is on the visibility aspect, right? While all of us might have bought SOC and might have set up SOC, might have evolved SOC, I think it comes down to visibility always, right? If you can see things, you can basically detect, you can take an action against it, you can remediate. So visibility again as a factor becomes a very, very critical aspect. Now coming back to the fintech problem altogether, right? When you look at fintech space, the fundamental thing that we have to understand is there is a card data environment and there is a non-card data environment, right? This is the first very, very basic things, right? And as a company, what we have done today is we have thought through, we have set a design in such a way wherein we have the visibility of the user path, right? And until and unless you have the visibility of your application around the user path on if a user today joins or if a user comes to an application today, what is their user path going to be on the application, right? Once you have understood that, it is very easy to understand the scope of your card data environment, which is different than your non-card data environment. And once you have established all of that, I think it becomes very easy to sort of build a genesis of your SOC on how you are going to develop, and I'm not even going to TTPs and complicated attacks. I'm just talking basics. And what I have seen today is most of these basics are not correct, right? Often I have seen people buying tools and trying to adapt the tools, which is as good as going on a maturity ladder even before understanding your risk, right? So a risk-based cybersecurity approach is something which is very, very critical in fintech when it comes to SOC.
Right. We'll just hold on to that thought here. I would like to, rope in Vanshit for this. Now, he just made a very interesting point about identifying the right tools. So, Vanshit, very quickly, in your experience, what have you used to identify the right kind of technologies that you wanted to implement in your SOC?
Oh, absolutely. So, understanding the technology is very essential, when it comes to the perfect use case for SOC. And I think the first thing that you need to understand is how your infra is built. Like, are you on cloud? Do you support remote working? And once you have identified all those parameters, then comes identifying the right approach to SOC. So I won't name any product as such, but I'll say that any product that implements automation, machine learning, that would be the right approach, because that way you can come out of the alert fatigue. Because when you set up a right, the SOC setup, then you get a lot of alerts, and most of your security engineers get filled up with all those alerts. And the one way to do that is to identify the crown jewels of your infrastructure, like what is that you really need to protect. You don't want to spend a lot of your time preventing phishing attacks and everything, because SOC is a reactive approach. It's not a preventive approach. So
Correct.
You need to identify what you need to protect.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Let's get Akhil's version on this really quick. So same kind of question, but then if you were to advise your fellow CISOs, especially in the finance or the fintech space, when it comes to setting up a future-proof SOC, what would be your top 3 takeaways for them, Akhil?
So thought process, actually both of them have already covered. So one main point is there, and which he was also touching base. We can protect those things which is visible if we can identify those things. So definitely it's like a thought process. It should be identifications of or a visibility of each and every assets, what we are going to protect it. This should be the first thing. And after that, as much as a threat intel, those things, if we are just getting it readily, means it should not be like, again, it's not like a tool base or something. It's whatever the feeds we are getting and how quickly, with either AI, ML, or whatever the buzzword you can use, is how quickly we can deploy it, those things. And the third and the last point, apart from these things, like orchestrations of all my solutions, if means definitely it's not a silver bullet anything, there are a lot of things are there. So if all these things are orchestrated, so that means seamlessly all this, whatever left, right movement, north, south movement and everything, whatever things are there, at least it can be, if it can be picked up. So those things, it is giving a robust structures to the SOC. So that is what my take for this.
Thanks for that, Akhil. You've given us a great segue into the next phase of the conversation. So, Dilip, I'd like to rope you in here for the next phase. Now, he brought up 2 very interesting points. One was visibility, that was one, and the second one was orchestration. Now, through my conversations with CISOs, I've also figured out that integration is another one thing that they're very keenly interested upon. So, if you could throw some light on the need for a unified platform that's able to deliver the orchestration, the integration, and the visibility for them.
Yeah, thank you. Distinguished panelists and honorary CISOs, thank you for the opportunity. So I think it's all about having a lot of visibility into your environment, right? Assessing who has access to what and trying to curtail and put control over those access is the first step that everybody needs to take. It was an open door back in the day when everybody is in the office, has access to a lot of things, there's a lot of trust. Now what's happened is with the bad threat actors and you have rogue employees, disgruntled, being laid off and all kinds of characteristics to the employees. You have a lot of rogue people coming in from inside the enterprise as well as external. So when we are able to find these orphaned accounts and orphaned user privileges, we are then able to narrow down where are these loopholes to actually get a lot more governance into the enterprise. The other thing is when we have a plethora of tools that actually give in multiple information, it's very hard for you to decipher what is really the threat landscape, right? So you have the best of the breed, A-class vendors, then you have niche vendors that have come about now, and then you're trying to make sense out of it. So you're lost in the flurry of information, which is not going to get you to the right thing. So how do you actually orchestrate to get to the next level and to have the best of breed is definitely a daunting task.
Thanks for that, Dilip. Now, let's say that we've set up our SOC right now. 6 months down the line, all right, now you've already got a SOC. Now you want to improve the efficiency of that SOC. So, let's move away from the fintech space. So with that, I would want to hear your views, Archit. So Archit, if you could talk about, what are some of the ways in which CISOs could actually improve the efficiency of the SOCs that they have? Essentially, ensure that you're able to get a proper return of investment on your security.
So before I start answering that, how we can make a more efficient SOC, I think first we should start that why SOC ever existed, right? At the acronym Security Operations Center. I think the acronym itself by design was, was very process driven, something where you could manage all your security operations. While the true meaning of that really lies beyond. Because I think in order to get a most efficient SOC, you need to have the right objectives for your SOC. And I think the top 3 objectives for your SOC has to be essentially first, visibility, second, uniformity, and then third, governance. Now I'll quickly elaborate that why these 3 things are interrelated and also very important. Because I think it has already been spoken at length by Himanshu, Akhil, that visibility is of course important because today we live in an integrated world. There are so many components and half of the people don't even have clue that what are assets on their landscape, and that's the reason we have features like asset discovery. So I think while asset discovery in itself is a big challenge and you got latest tools to do that. So I think visibility of course becomes important because once you have the right visibility, then you can take action on that. And then there comes the second aspect, that after you have gained visibility, you need to be applying uniform policies and uniform controls on all of that, right? So if people have spoken enough about misconfiguration being one of the leading factors of information security breaches and incidents, I think misconfiguration is a living testimony and a crystal clear example of non-uniformity. So, and once you have visibility and uniformity, then of course, you can exercise the right amount of governance. That's part number 1. Quickly, part number 2 is an effective SOC would be which will be constituted of complementing products and not a lot of redundant rounds. So I think as a security practitioner, we should be focused that how do we kill redundancy, because these days you have a lot of products. The market is really cluttered up with so many products. There are so many overlapping features and functionalities. We should always focus on building an ecosystem where all these different products that we orchestrate should complement each other.
Absolutely, thanks for that. Let me quickly head over to Byju's. So if you could tell us, Mukesh, you come from a space that is, not dealing with financial data as such. That's not your core asset. What's the important role of a SOC, and how do you ensure that it's able to meet your business objectives?
So even though we don't come from an fintech or a financial, I think the PII information in any industry is equally critical to protect, right? So whether it is an edtech or any other company, and same as with Byju's. I think the whole crux of the problem is how do you ensure that your crown jewels are being protected and you're not, getting into that heaps of data which is coming into the SOC and losing the whole context, right? So I think few of the things which we have been doing, whether it's Byju's or in the previous organization, is identify your crown jewels. It could be in applications, it will be databases, it could be identity, and then start creating your policies which are protecting this crown jewel for all possible attacks which can happen, right? So all your policies, all your automations which you are going to put in has to ensure that any vulnerabilities which are going to affect this are being identified at the right time, and you're protecting that, right? We all know that one legacy application or maybe an low vulnerable, low critical application can lead into an your crown jewel getting compromised, while we start focusing, and that's the reason we start focusing on 100% of the things. I think what you can lead is, if your crown jewels can have an options of these are the things through which it can get compromised, look at all those attack vectors, threats, inputs which you want to do, and that's where you'll get the efficiency of your SOC.
Great point there, Mukesh. I'm sure we'll agree that, PII is just as important. As soon as we have a personal data protection law implemented, I think the stakes are going to be raised even higher. It already is, with the breach reporting mandates, but let's see where we go with that. So I would want to get Ayush into the conversation. Now, summing up from what we've heard from all our CISOs out here, there is a necessity to look at real-time assets. There's a necessity for real-time monitoring. And the key word here is real-time. So could you emphasize, the need for that? In what ways can CISOs add capabilities to ensure that what they are seeing and what they're monitoring is all in real time and they're able to act accordingly?
So I think there is a SOC component to it that the group has been discussing here, and there's a preemptive component to it, right? So I'm going to talk more about the preemptive component of it. Now, just solving for the real-timeness is something that there are ample tools out there. In fact, there is a deluge of tools out there, right? Any 2 or 3 letters you pick in the alphabet now, chances are it will already be an acronym in the security space. That's the way the space has evolved in the last 2-3 years, right? So now the question really is that, so getting information is not the problem. Getting data is not the problem. You have a bunch of tools out there, right? The question is, how do you correlate that information, make sense of it? And you pointed out about actually taking a risk-first approach instead of, adding a layer of sophisticated tools on top. So Shomik, for example, is the owner of an EC2 instance. Shomik is an owner of an RDS instance, right? Shomik is an owner of an endpoint on which you may have an XDR tool to real-time monitor information. You could have an MDM tool on it. Shomik is probably also responsible for a vendor risk assessment, right? Now, you could have that information coming from different places, but the fact is, how do you correlate all of it, right? And have one window where you can observe it. The fact is, in the organization, Shomik is the most dangerous asset right now. And he needs to be kept behind bars or kept with bodyguards, right? Because that's most vulnerable. So the question is, you get that information, how do you correlate all of that and actually make sense of where your risks lie, right? The real time is not the problem. The problem is there is a deluge of data, and how do you make sense of it through the correlation? In some small ways, we are trying to take a serious attempt at solving it, but this is not meant to be an advert for Scratch, so I'll hold off on it. But I think that's where the bigger problem lies, because that gives you a visibility of where your risks are, and any security program is built on top of that.
I agree. Great points brought up there, Ayush. And yeah, you did make it sound a little too alarming with my position, but yeah, I second where you're coming from. Now, Archit, let me quickly get back to you. Let's go with a little bit of crystal gazing. Now, you constantly keep looking at technologies. Now, based on the threats that you're seeing in 2023, how does it compare to what you've seen 2 years back? Are they the same? Earlier, ransomware used to be the biggest threat for CISOs. And now we're seeing, script kiddies are able to hack into big companies, Cisco, NVIDIA, etc., by using legitimate access. So how has that threat evolved, and then how are you trying to adapt team leads with it?
I think while threat landscape has certainly evolved, and in a lot of my previous discussions, I've always said that threat landscape is actually evolving as an exponential pace, right? And the important aspect is it's difficult to pinpoint that these are the 3 top threats. Of course, there are numerous reports available that quite categorically mention that this is threat number 1, 2, 3. But I think the real underlying fact is that what is that empowering thing that leads to these threats? I think that is first the lack of visibility in an encompassing and an enriching and integrated world. And the second, which Ayush just mentioned, is actually correlation, right? Because even if you are able to gather insights on your assets, then correlation actually becomes a very challenging thing. Now, the thing is that in isolation, a particular vector may not look malicious enough that you should pay attention to. However, a combination of different such things can actually lead to a very famous thing. The Kandahar hijacking. I'm not sure how many of you would know. Have you ever imagined that how could a terrorist actually brought an armed weapon in an airplane? Was it not so obvious that the security personnel did not frisk him with a weapon
how could a person have hid that weapon in plain sight? The answer is that that particular handgun was dismantled into 9 different parts and kept in different containers and also alongside different people. So that's the reason all those individual parts did not seem malicious or did not seem, dangerous. And he just took all of them and assembled the gun right there. So I think that's where the point of correlation makes sense. And I think that is the key underlying threat that actually empowers other things like whether an insider threat or a ransomware or spoofing or credential stuffing, things like that.
I think you brought up a very pertinent fact there, and yes, the memories of IC 814 is still, relatively fresh in everyone's mind, but that's a great way to illustrate it. Let me quickly get Akhil into the conversation. Now, Akhil, if you could tell us, how much time CISOs typically would spend when they're trying to, overlook all of these monitoring activities, etc., manually. Also, what is the cost impact of it? Have you tried anything at your company that's been able to cut down the number of hours you've spent on this, or cut down the money required for this, the expense?
So definitely, like analyzing those things, it's required a lot of time. Definitely, unless until proper robust automation is not in place. We are doing those things means in this organization, earlier organizations, and I'm sure all the organizations are trying to do that automations part to reduce the time. Coming to like a lot of new emerging technologies, means definitely it is helping to reduce those things. And thought process is there, and we are also just following whenever this manpower reducing and all these things. So definitely it is going to directly impact on the cost side, and which is definitely it's a major factor for any organization and security budget and all those things. So it is a major impact. So definitely we are trying to do that.
All right. Dilip, may I quickly ask you, when it comes to trying to automate workflows, in your opinion, what are 3 factors that CISOs must consider when they decide which workflows to automate? How do they go about the decisioning process?
Yeah, so some of the things that are compelling most CISOs is a boardroom mandate that is actually coming about, where you're asked to do a lot of access certification, right? And in terms of validating who's got access to what, and then you're trying to do also segregation of duties. You want to know who is approving, who is not approving, or is it an automated workflow to approve? And the third thing is all about giving just-in-time privileges to the users. You don't want to curtail the user from doing his daily operational stuff by limiting his user and privileges, but you want to give him the right privilege at the right time so he's able to do this work more effectively. So I think this has suddenly become a boardroom mandate. I think for the last 2 odd years, the boardroom's also very tech savvy, and they are mandating CISOs to look this up and put in some technologies.
All right, thanks for that. Now, we are running a little short of time, so let me quickly jump to the last conversation that we want to have. A lot of people have brought around this, and in the course of 2.5 days, we have seen one underlying factor. There's a whole lot of acronyms out there. There are a whole lot of threat intelligence, compliance requirements, etc. How do you churn it? How do you break it down and help your CFOs and your board understand and get a buy-in to get that security investment up? So is there any strategy that's worked for you, Mukesh? Would you want to share some of that with us? How do you break down threat intelligence?
I think when you're dealing with the board and the CFOs, all you have to do is simplify and bring that risk factor within credibility, brand, your brand taking a hit. I think they don't need to understand the technology and the acronyms. They need to understand the business risk, and as long as you're able to make them understand within defined plan on how and what you're going to do to mitigate that risk, it becomes easier for you to navigate that particular discussion with that level.
All right. We'll just wrap up with yours, Ayush. Could you give us a 30-second 101 into converting risk management for CFOs and the board?
I the boards and CFOs understand OKRs because they tie back to the business, right? And ultimately, cutting through the noise and the deluge of acronyms, as he also mentioned very rightly in the space. I think if we can break it down in the form of simple OKRs and how it impacts business, I think it'll be a lot easier for boards also to approve budgets, to allow purchase of certain tools, allow setting up of certain teams. Because ultimately, I mean, it's not us versus them, right? I mean, everybody's invested in making sure the business runs in a continuous manner. So I think it needs to be broken down in the form of simple OKRs that everybody can understand and socialize. So.
All right, thanks so much for that. Well, we don't have the time for questions, but then our panelists are going to be here. You can interact with them during the drinks and the dinner session. So thank you, folks. Thanks for having the patience. Thanks for joining us this evening. And thank you so much, panelists. It was great talking to you guys. Thanks again.